What is going on, everybody? My name is John Solo, and today I thought we'd have some fun with the wonderful world of Disney. Like many others, I've always found the parental roles in Disney films to be rather interesting. Some movies feature great parents that teach their children how to succeed in the world and impart wisdom they later use to accomplish their ultimate goals, whatever they may be. Other movies feature garbage parents that are abusive, manipulative, or overprotective, sometimes all three, and in some cases the parents just die, leaving the kids to figure things out for themselves. Disney has told a lot of stories over the years, and I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the roles that parents play within them and rank them in a tier list based on their parenting abilities. I'm recording this video 2 weeks in advance, so we probably already missed out on the tier list trend by now, but when was the last time we did anything trendy on this channel anyway? I do just want to jump into this though, and I'm sure you do too, so don't forget to drop a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and most importantly, enjoy. So I think we have to start with the greatest of all time, Mufasa and Sarabi. They are like the pinnacle of parenthood. We see both of them nurturing Simba and teaching him valuable life lessons throughout the first act. Mufasa risked his life and ultimately lost it because he wanted to save his son. And Sarabi, who is the strongest of the females, is the only one to stand up to Scar for the sake of everyone else in the pride and get smacked for it. They exemplify some of the greatest traits that parents and leaders can have, so I place them confidently in the S tier. Now, the evil queen appeared to have a very hands-off parenting approach. She hires a huntsman to cut out Snow White's heart and doesn't really interact with Snow White until the end of the movie when she's trying to kill her herself. And the whole reason she's trying to kill Snow White in the first place is because she's hotter than her. It's because of that I have no problem placing this jealous in the F tier. Now, as far as I can remember, Maurice doesn't really do anything that shows that he's a bad parent. In fact, he actually gets captured by the Beast solely for stealing a rose for his daughter Belle, and then when Belle comes to rescue him, he doesn't want her to trade places with him in the Beast's cell. A parent that's willing to make such a major sacrifice is a winner in my book, but he's not a complete winner. You can tell just by looking at Maurice that he's not taking care of his health, and he's gonna leave Belle without a father much earlier than necessary, which is especially terrible because she already doesn't have a mom. He appears to be a great father, but he also appears to love carbs and being sedentary more than he loves the idea of living a long life and watching his grandchildren grow up. And that's why I don't feel comfortable placing him in the S tier, so in the A tier he goes. Now, George and Mary Darling from Peter Pan appear to be good parents. They certainly provide for their kids, that's undeniable. But the narrator describes the father as being highly practical, and the father obviously gets frustrated that his sons aren't the same way. This is despite them being 4 and 8 years old. Like, come on, dude, you can't expect your kids to not be kids. And let's also not forget that a dog is their nanny, albeit it's a very capable dog, but I'm curious what responsibilities are left to the parents themselves. I will say they do seem to come around to their kids' way of thinking by the end of the movie, but that's just after they got back from a party, maybe they were a little bit liquored up and a little more open-minded. Who knows what happens in the morning? It could just be right back to the same old thing. I don't feel like they're great parents, and I don't feel like they're terrible parents. So, dead center C tier is where they're going. Next, we have George and Mary Banks, the only live-action parents on this list because Mary Poppins is a classic. They're a lot like the Darling parents, though, another early 1900s couple where the father's got a stick up his They also seem to have a very hands-off approach to raising their children and would rather them be raised by a nanny than themselves. And the weird thing is, whatever nanny they get, at least the father wants it to be a serious one that doesn't allow any fun. And let's not forget that when the kids write their own advertisement for a nanny that's more suitable to their taste, as in fun and not completely serious, he literally rips it up and throws it in the fire. He also lets this old fuck snatch money right out of his kid's hand. Like, what are you doing, dude? I'll give him credit for doing a complete 180 by the end of the story, but if you've seen the sequel, it's obvious that Michael grew up with some sort of no-nonsense mentality embedded deep into his psyche. I think the mother is a really good character, admittedly a little too subservient to her husband. I know that's how the times were back then, but it's a little confusing to me as she seems like a pretty radical feminist. Because George obviously gave their kids complexes and Winifred did basically nothing to stop it, I'm gonna give them a D rank, and I don't feel bad about it. Next, we have King Stefan, or King Stefan, and Queen Leah, the parents from Sleeping Beauty, who I also consider to be some of the worst parents on this list. Straight out of the womb, they basically set their daughter up for failure by overprotecting her. Listen, I get why you wouldn't want to invite a fairy that embodies pure evil to your newborn daughter's birthday celebration, but why wouldn't you at least weigh your options and just play it safe to stay on her good side? Then they respond to Maleficent's curse in the worst way possible by continuing to overprotect her and isolating her in the forest with some of the most incompetent fairies imaginable. Then Prince Philip, who was obviously raised right, allowed to go on adventures of his own and get himself in trouble, is the one responsible for saving her. The dude literally slays a dragon by throwing his sword at it. Meanwhile, she's sent into a coma by touching a needle on a spinning wheel. With a smile on my face, I will happily happily place King Stefan and Queen Leia in the E rank. The only reason they didn't get an F rank is because their raising the weakest child imaginable wasn't intentional, and we do have some straight killers in the F rank, so gotta give him some credit. Next we have Zeus and Hera, who appear to be really loving parents, but you can't deny that they dropped the ball. Like, maybe they should have had their baby's nursery a little closer to him so they could have kept an eye on him. Like, I get that they're gods and they don't expect anything terrible to happen to him, but you gotta be slightly cautious. And let's not forget that he was also kidnapped by some of the most incompetent minions imaginable. They deserve credit for being loving parents and Zeus helping Hercules along his journey from zero to hero, but you can't deny that they really messed up. And that's why I'm putting them in the B tier. Look at that, we have one in every tier now. Let's move on to Alcmene and Amphitryon, Hercules' adopted parents. They found him in a cave and raised him to adulthood, so they get credit for that. And then when the time was right, they told him the truth about where he was from and let him begin his journey, even though it was difficult for them. And outside of those two things, you know they were great parents, because when Hercules made it big, he bought him a house and everything. So I'm gonna put them in the S rank. Don't fight me on this. Next, we have Geppetto, who wanted more than anything to be a father, but clearly wasn't prepared for it. If he had just walked Pinocchio to his first day of school, a standard practice for about 90% of parents, about all the trouble in this movie could have been avoided. I mean, you gotta give him some credit because he wished Pinocchio into existence, and then when Pinocchio went missing, he went out searching for him, despite being elderly and not being able to take on the elements like a young man could, and he almost lost his life to Monstro in the process. Like, that's a big deal. In my book, you get a lot of points for doing that, but you also have to consider that when Pinocchio was swallowed by Monstro, Geppetto was just weirdly okay with letting them both die in there. It seemed like after he was swallowed, he didn't even try to escape, he just accepted his fate. It took an adolescent Pinocchio, who literally has a brain made of wood, to rescue his father from the belly of the whale. Like, come on, Geppetto, did you critically think at all the whole time you were down there? I will say his heart was in the right place, though. He really does seem like he loves Pinocchio, and I can't really bash him for trying to foster independence in his son when I just critiqued Stefan and Leia for trying to do the opposite with Aurora. So I'm throwing him in the B tier. Next, we have Triton, another parent guilty of overprotection. He doesn't let Ariel speak with humans because it's banned, but he doesn't ever really explain why. It's more of a because I said so rule. And then when Ariel does it anyway, he destroys all of her human artifacts, something that is obviously going to exacerbate her fascination with them. He does redeem himself just a smidge when he recognizes that he's partially responsible for Ariel's recklessly signing the contract with Ursula and trades places with her to be the Sea Witch's prisoner. But even still, that situation never would have had to happen if he wasn't such a psychotic control freak, so in the D tier he goes. Next, we have Aladdin's dad Cassim, who literally abandons his family in search for treasure, thinking that's what they would want over him, you know, actually being present in their lives. After finally meeting Aladdin and being invited to the royal palace as his guest, he steals from them, and then in total he spends about a week with Aladdin before abandoning him again, so I'm throwing him in the E tier. Now, I don't know how many of you have watched Bambi recently. I actually did sometime in the past year or so, first time as an adult because of the Messed Up Origin series, but Bambi's parents are basically the Mufasa and Sarabi of the forest. His mom both taught him the essentials of life and let him go out and play with his friends on his own. Then on that awful day when the hunter comes, she runs alongside Bambi and doesn't try to run ahead of him to make sure that he can actually escape safely, knowing full well what that means for her. She does it anyway and pays the price. And while his father, the great prince of the forest, wasn't as involved during the early years, you can't really knock any points for it because that's clearly not part of deer culture. And let's not forget that as soon as Bambi's mom dies, he comes back to fill the role, something he had no obligation to do. And when there's that giant forest fire, he risks his life to save him. Both of Bambi's parents took risks and made sacrifices to ensure that he would be the next great prince of the forest, and it's for that reason that they go in the S tier. Now let's talk about Tarzan's parents, a couple that I am very iffy on. As you may have noticed, I didn't include many parents on this list who died right away and didn't play a huge role in their kids' lives, but if it weren't for Tarzan's parents sailing wherever they were sailing, he wouldn't have wound up in the jungle, and I can't help but wonder why they were trying to sail around the world with a brand new baby. Doesn't seem like a sensible risk. I will say they did their best once they're shipwrecked. They built a house, they sacrificed their lives to protect him from a leopard, but it was still a dumb situation to put themselves in the first place. And you know, if they didn't do any of that traveling and Tarzan was just raised where he was meant to be raised, he probably would have wound up being a Calvin Klein model or something like that. I mean, look at the dude's jawline. I want to knock off a lot of points for taking an unnecessary trip around the world with a newborn baby, but I can't say for sure how unnecessary the trip was, so I can't knock off too much. And after they did wreck, they did what they could where they were with what they had. So I'm putting them in the dead center. Give giving him a C. But then we have Tarzan's beautiful gorilla mama, Kala. She hears his little baby cries, she tracks him down, she saves him from being eaten by a leopard as well, risking her life in the process. She then convinces their scary-ass leader to accept him as one of the group, despite him being vehemently opposed to the idea. And let's not forget that in what I consider to be one of the most heartfelt, beautiful scenes in any Disney movie, when Tarzan struggles with his identity, she's there to console him and help him feel like he belongs, ultimately turning him into the king of the jungle. I think Kala is an amazing mother and totally worthy of an S rank. Moving on to Mulan's parents, these guys were tough because they didn't really do anything that was overtly negative or positive. They were blinded by tradition and tried to force Mulan into a life that clearly wasn't meant for her, which I count as a negative, but her father was clearly willing to sacrifice his life to protect them and his country, so that's a positive. Because their parenting skills are equally impressive and unimpressive, I'm throwing them in the B tier. Next we have Mother Gothel, who's one of the most abusive and manipulative parents on this list. She kidnaps Rapunzel from her real parents and locks her in a tower, manipulates her and brainwashes her into thinking that she's too weak to survive the outside world. Remind you of any other parents on this list? What makes her worse than them though is that she does it solely so she can harvest the powers in Rapunzel's hair, something she probably could have done anyway if she just let her live a normal life. She also tries to murder the man she loves, so I'm giving her an F. On to Cloud Frollo. This guy is a freak. He kills Quasimodo's mom, adopts him out of obligation, then mentally, emotionally, and physically abuses him his entire life. It's actually kind of similar to the Rapunzel story, as he's manipulated into thinking he's not strong enough to withstand the cruel outside world. Because of his loyalty to his religion, this dude is also crazy sexually frustrated. I'm not trying to be crude, but you can tell just from his musical number that he's in desperate need of busting a nut. His religious fanaticism and the eternal dry spell that he committed himself to makes him do some crazy things, including trying to kill Quasimodo and the gypsy they're both in love with. I don't know what else I need to say besides f this guy. He gets an F rank. F is for f this guy. Moving on to Moana's parents, they were also pretty hard to rank. They're clearly loving parents who want the best for their daughter, but they refuse to hear her out, even when the existence of their entire society depends on it. When someone is a leader of an entire society like her father is, it's kind of hard to weigh his chief responsibilities versus his parental responsibilities. And that's why I'm giving them a B. They had more than just their daughter to look out for, they had several families to look out for. And overall, it seems like they did a pretty good job. I was actually having a similar problem with Pocahontas' dad, Chief Powhatan. Have you noticed I saved some of the hardest ones for last? Throughout the movie, we see him as a stern leader who refuses to listen to his daughter's wishes, which entail her not wanting to marry Kocoum and for the tribe to try and live in peace with the newcomers from England. I can dock him some points for trying to force his daughter into an unhappy marriage, but we all know he was right in not trusting the white man, so he doesn't lose any points for that. As a result, I'm giving him a B. Next, we have the mother from one of my favorite Disney movies ever, Dumbo. Throughout the entire movie, she loves and nurtures her baby to the best of her ability. Her only slip-up is when she snaps on the kid for harassing him and gets herself locked up for it. But you can't really blame her for that though. Not only is he insulting her baby, but he's physically abusing him, so naturally she had to teach him a lesson. It doesn't even make sense that the kid was allowed to mess with Dumbo like that in the first place, and is more of a critique of the circus management than her parenting skills. So I'm throwing Mama Jumbo in the S rank. Moving on to our next candidates, the parents from Frozen, with names that I just have no chance of pronouncing, so I won't try. I don't know if I've ever changed my opinion on a movie as drastically as I changed it with Frozen. I loved it the first several times that I saw it, and while I don't necessarily hate it now, I really don't enjoy watching it. Largely because her parents fell into the same overprotective trap that Sleeping Beauty's parents fell into, but maybe worse. Not only do they make her daughter fear the outside world's judgment of her, they make her fear herself. Conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. Really, are you that daft? People actually defend them, saying they were scared of her powers too. They didn't know how to handle them. But I don't care if they were scared. Even if they were, as parents, they had a responsibility to conceal, not feel, and not let it show. But instead, they gave that burden to their adolescent daughter. They definitely had the funds to set up a little practice room in the palace so she could hone her abilities and learn to control them. But instead, they chose to give her some dainty gloves and lock her in her bedroom. Yeah, nice one, guys. I wonder why she grew up to be a walking ball of insecurity. It is with much satisfaction that I give the former King and Queen of Arendelle an E for exceptionally terrible parents. The only reason they're not going in the F tier is because they didn't actively try to kill her. Moving on to Tiana's parents, I actually don't have that much to say about them, but from what I can gather, they did an excellent job. They imparted their passions on their daughter while also raising her to be a hardworking, goal-oriented individual. So when you consider that and the fact that we don't see any underlying issues rise up in Tiana's psyche that may have stemmed from their parenting style, that's pretty good. I'm gonna give him an S, and if you want to fight me for it, Let's go. And lastly, we have Cinderella's stepmother, Lady Tremaine. This broad did pretty much everything short of killing Cinderella, and I'm pretty sure the only reason she didn't do that is because she knew her daughters couldn't keep such a juicy secret. But even without attempting to murder her, she kept her as a slave, abused her mentally and emotionally, and did it all with a smile on her face. The worst part is, she didn't have anything to gain from abusing her like that. She wasn't given eternal youth or called the fairest of them all. She was just a jealous. Just look at that face. That's more than resting face. That lady was evil to the core, and I think we can all agree that if Cinderella had continued to live with her without going to the ball, it just would have gotten worse. It's not like she was a good parent to her own daughters either. No, she wasn't abusive to them, but she gave them whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. As a result, they grew up to be sociopathic, spoiled brats, and when it came down to it, they didn't even care about each other's happiness, just their own. And it's for that reason that Lady Tremaine is getting a big fat F for her parenting abilities. And with the placement of that old hag comes the end of this video. So tell me, Disney fans, do you agree with how I rank these characters? Comment why or why not down below. When it comes down to it, it really is just a matter of opinion, but I've always prided myself on having the right opinion. So I'm curious to see how many of you agree with me and how many of you are completely wrong. As always, don't forget to give that like button a gentle caress if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it, and subscribe to see more Disney content coming soon. I've also got the links to my social media down below. If you want to stay updated on what projects I'm working on next, or you just want to say what's up, go ahead and give me a follow. I'll be speaking with you again soon, Solo fam. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.